Random House Audio presents The Third Angel by Alice Hoffman, read for you by Nancy Travis. Part 1. The Heron's Wife, 1999. Madeleine Heller knew she was reckless. She had flown to London from New York 2 days ahead of schedule and was now checked into her room at the Lion Park Hotel in Knightsbridge. The air was still and filled with dust motes. The windows hadn't been opened in months. Everything smelled like cedar and lavender. Maddie felt hot and exhausted from her travels, but she didn't bother to turn on the air conditioner. She was madly, horribly, ridiculously in love with the wrong man, and it made her want to lie there on the bed, immobilized. Madeleine wasn't stupid. She was an attorney in New York. She was 34 years old and had graduated from Oberlin and NYU Law School, a tall woman with long black hair. Many people thought she was beautiful and smart, but none of those people mattered. They didn't know her. They had no idea she was a traitor to her own flesh and blood. They would never have guessed she would throw her life away so easily, without thinking twice. There was good love, and there was bad love. There was the kind that helped raise a person above her failings, and there was the desperate sort that struck when someone least wanted or expected it. That was what had happened to Maddie this past spring when she'd come to London to help plan her sister's wedding. Allie hadn't even asked for her help. It was their mother, Lucy, who told Maddie she should go to London and assist with the preparations. She was the maid of honor, after all. And then when she got there, Allie had already taken care of everything, just as she always did. Allie was older by 13 months. She was the good sister, the perfect sister, the one who had everything. She was a writer who had published an extremely popular children's book. When she walked down the street, people often recognized her, and she was always willing to sign scraps of paper for someone's child or present a fan with one of the book plates she carried in her purse. Once a year, she came back to the States to give readings for what had become a perennially popular event where children dressed up in bird costumes. There were 9- and 10-year-old cardinals and ducks and crows all waiting online to have their copy of The Heron's Wife signed. Maddie sometimes accompanied her sister on tour. She couldn't believe all the fuss over a silly children's story, one Allie had pinched from a tale their mother used to tell. Technically, the story belonged to Maddie as much as it did to her sister, not that she'd felt the need to write a book or change it inside out to suit herself. The story was one Lucy Heller would tell down by the marsh where the girls had grown up. Lucy's own mother, the girls' grandmother, had waded barefoot into a pond in Central Park to talk to a huge blue heron. She didn't care what people thought, she just went right in. She'd asked the heron to watch over Lucy, and he always had. Now Lucy had asked him to protect her own girls, and he had come to live in their marsh in Connecticut. "How can a heron watch over a person?" Maddie had whispered to her sister. She didn't have much faith in stories, even though she was only 8 years old. In that way, she was very much the skeptic her mother had been. "He can have 2 separate lives," Allie was quick to say, as though the answer was simple, if only Maddie could unwind the mysteries of the universe. "He has his heron life up in the sky and his life down here." "I'm glad he can help us both," Maddie said. "Don't be ridiculous." Allie was always so definite and sure of herself. "The blue heron only has one true love." And so it came to be in Allie's book. There was a woman who married a man she loved. The couple lived in a house that resembled the one on the marsh where the sisters had grown up. There were the same tall silver reeds, the same inky black sky. The bride and groom resided in their house made of sticks and stones for nearly a year in happiness and peace. And then one day, when the man was out fishing for their supper, there was a knock on the door. The woman answered, and there was the groom's other wife, a blue heron come to look for her missing husband. "How can you stand all these children around?" Maddie had asked at an especially crowded reading. They had runny noses, they were germ-filled, noisy, and rude. And did they have to laugh so loudly? It was ear-splitting. In Allie's book, the heron wife was wasting away. Her feathers were falling out. She hadn't eaten a mouthful since her husband had left. One of us wins, and one of us loses, But which will it be? She asked the bride at the door. They're my readers. I want them to laugh. Allie was the one who always came home for visits, but at long last Maddie was to be her sister's guest. Frankly, she'd avoided coming to London. She said she was too busy, but it was more than that. She didn't need to see how perfect Allie's world was. Finally, there was no getting around it. There was a wedding to attend to, after all. A wedding where Maddie would once again be the sidekick, the bad little sister who couldn't follow rules, who even as a grown woman was still afraid of ridiculous things, thunderstorms and mice, traffic jams and airplanes. She would most likely be made to wear a horrible dress of some dreadful synthetic fabric, while her sister glowed in white silk or satin. Second rate, second best, the dark side of everything. She never believed men who told her she was beautiful, and she shied away from friendships. She did her work and kept to herself. The sort of woman who could stand idly by while children removed a butterfly's wings or buried a toad in the mud. What people did on their own time was none of her business. Cruelty, after all, was a fact of life. It wasn't up to her to set the world right. That sort of thing was her sister's concern. Because Maddie was only in London for a long weekend that April, arriving on a Thursday and departing late Monday, she and Allie had raced directly from the airport to the dressmaker's so that Maddie could have her fitting. They'd been close as children, but had grown apart, and were now as different as sisters could be. Allie, however, had done her best to try and choose a dress that would suit Maddie. Blue silk, flattering, showing off Maddie's figure. As for Maddie, she hated the dress, but she kept her mouth shut. She had decided she would try to be the agreeable sister for once in her life. She even agreed to taste potential wedding cakes when they were done with the dresses. That was why she was here, to help her sister. They went to the baker's and tasted half a dozen confections, but the buttercream frostings were too heavy and the chocolates were too rich. Allie hadn't seemed satisfied with anything. She said she thought wedding preparations were a waste of time. In the end, she chose a plain yellow cake that had been made from her own recipe. She hadn't really needed Maddie after all. Maddie was still in her compliant mode. Good decision, she said. Plain is the way to go, less chance for anything to go wrong. Not that she believed in that particular philosophy when it came to herself. Plain was good for Allie, not Maddie. Maddie was greedy, and she always had been. She used to steal from her sister headbands, jewelry, T-shirts. If this had been her wedding cake, she would have wanted mousse and jam and chocolate and brandied apricots and spun sugar. There was no such thing as too much for a girl who always thought she was second best. The day after the cake tasting adventure, both sisters were curled up in bed with stomach aches under a comforter. They wore pajamas and socks. When they were children, they hadn't needed anyone but each other. It felt that way again for an hour or two as they sipped cups of tea. But there was no way to regain what Allie had ruined when she'd left home. When it came down to it, they really had nothing in common anymore. It had been 17 years since Allie had gone to college in Boston. She went off to London in her junior year, returning only for a week or so at a time. She'd deserted Madeleine, left her alone in the big house in Connecticut with their parents, who had reunited after several years of leading separate lives. The Hellers had no close neighbors and Maddie had no friends. She was standoffish in the way that lonely people often are. After her sister left, Maddie grew more isolated. Even when she went off to Oberlin, she was the only one who came home for winter term or spring break. When Allie's letters arrived, Maddie refused to read them. Instead, she went out to sit in the reeds. On days when the sky was clear, she would sometimes see the blue heron who lived there. She had read that most herons lived in pairs, the larger male and the more delicate female, coupled for life. But this one was alone. He was far off across the water. She often called to him, but he didn't seem to hear her. He never once looked her way. Allie's flat, off of Bayswater, was airy but nondescript, not at all Maddie's style. Nothing to envy. Simplicity once again. Allie's wardrobe was full of wool and cashmere in shades of gray and navy and black. Practical clothes that were well tailored. Maddie knew this because she'd sneaked a look in the closet while Allie was in the shower. She felt as though there was a mystery about her sister, some essential detail that would explain her superhuman abilities to do the right thing. She didn't find any clues in all her searching, although she did discover that the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?